Hi, everyone. Eugene Hernandez here from Film at Lincoln Center. And thank you again for joining us for this nationwide art house sneak preview of Judas and the Black Messiah. Special thanks again to our friends at Warner Brothers, and a reminder that Judas and the Black Messiah opens in theaters and on HBO Max on February 12th. Tell a friend. We are really looking forward to this conversation. Thank you for sticking around. I'm looking forward to the opportunity to sit down and have a discussion with the director, producer, and co-writer of Judas and the Black Messiah. Please join me in welcoming him, Shaka King. Shaka, it's nice to talk to you. Thank you for, thank you for this film, first of all.
Thank you.
And thank you for sharing it with us. It's, this, as I've said to the audience tuning in right now, it's really meaningful, and we're all grateful that you've shared this movie with us for this nationwide art house sneak preview of the film. It's a great opportunity for us to not only share this movie in cities all around the country at art houses all around the country, but also to have a chance to talk with you about it. So thanks again.
Thank you.
I think it was probably a little over 7 years ago, we had you at Lincoln Center at our art house. I'm sorry we can't be there in person to do this. We did that really special evening, special reading of Do the Right Thing. That was a really special night. And I hope that once the world reopens again, we can invite you back to Lincoln Center so we can sit down in a movie theater and talk properly.
I'd love to.
Look, we're going to dig into the film. We'll dig into a little bit more about you and introduce you to maybe folks in our audience who haven't seen your work. So we'll talk about your background as well. But just to kind of dive into it. It's rare that I watch a film and then in the old days I would rewind the tape and watch it again. In this case, I just pushed play one more time after I watched your movie. I went back and watched it again because there's so much to take in. Not just the story, but what you're doing cinematically with this movie. So congratulations. And again, we're going to dig into some of that tonight in this conversation. Do you, I wonder if you remember, or you can share with our audience when the name Fred Hampton meant something to you, when the Black Panthers meant something to you.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that because I grew up hearing the name Fred Hampton, and I was trying to place where, and I remember one of the first people to utter his name was a guy I knew growing up named Brother Kafra. And he actually I was part of a group called the Junior Engineers Club in fourth grade, I think like maybe third and fourth grade. And it was run by this guy named Brother Kafra, who was an Egyptologist and comedic scientist in Bed-Stuy. He had a brownstone. He was teaching young Black kids trigonometry at a very early age, hieroglyphics, and he was the first person I ever saw with an ankh. He used to carry like big metal ankhs. And he mentioned Fred Hampton, and obviously he talked to us about Black history as well, and African history. But he mentioned Fred Hampton once, or probably several times. And the only thing I remember hearing about him was that this is what I was told, was that he'd been shot 100 times while lying asleep next to his pregnant wife by the police. I didn't know it was the FBI initially. And I remember the way he spoke about him was just that he was so brave and so fearless. And when I think about the people I heard talking about him growing up, it was always very masculine men. He taught Tai Chi, he was a sensei, And I think that a lot of Black men in particular have always admired Fred Hampton for his bravery above all. So that was one of my first impressions of him as a child.
So you grew up in New York, went to NYU. Am I correct about that?
Yeah. For grad school, went to
for grad school
program. Yeah.
When do you remember when you realized or decided that film was a pursuit for you, or was there a light bulb? Was there a specific film? Was there a group of films or artists?
It was really the experience of, I've been writing short stories since high school, and I went to college, and my college didn't have a writing major. creative writing major. So I just was like, fuck it, I'll take political science. Like, it's just, you know, something to do. I know how to do it. I can get B's and I can kind of coast. And I was doing that. And my junior year, my editor to this day, Kristen Sprague, who at the time was just my friend in college, he was a film major. And junior year is when you were allowed to start taking production courses. And he was having a blast. And he was like, man, I just don't really get along with anybody in the class. I wish you could join and, you know, partner up with me. And so I went to the, you know, I don't remember, dean, I don't know who, and convinced him to allow me to double major in political science and filmmaking. And the plan was that I would take my prerequisite courses simultaneously while taking the production courses. But then I just, without telling them, dropped the prerequisites and just was taking the production courses. And it was that junior year that I just, I mean, we were, you know, shooting on on 16 black and white reversal, editing, not even on a moviola. We had some other like really, really old school analog, you know, splicing with tape, and it was just fun. And it was an opportunity for me to get back into storytelling, which was something I discovered in high school that I loved. And between my junior and senior year of college, I was like, this is what I want to do.
Thanks for sharing that backstory and background with us. I don't know. I was thinking as I was watching the film, I told you I watched it twice in the same night a few weeks ago now. It's actually maybe about a month ago now.
I realized it was in the same night.
Yeah, I went back immediately. I do that once in a while. Wow. Not often, I have to say. So congratulations. But I think the reason I did, and folks who are watching this now can, you know, this is the night before it opens, so people can do the same tomorrow. I was not only looking to, you know, learn more about and connect with the story of Fred Hampton and the world and story of the Black Panthers, but was also really digging into the filmmaking. And I hope you don't mind the homage that I'll make, or the comment that I'll make, in that I when I watched the film the second time, I couldn't help but think of the work of another New York filmmaker, Scorsese, in terms of like the sort of the genre, the style, the type of movie, the way you know, there's so many different ways to tell the story of a person from real life, a person from history. And there's so many threads to this story and to these lives that you're exploring. But I don't know, something just provoked me into kind of making a connection to like some classic, like whether it's gangster or thriller stories. So I wonder if you could share with us sort of, as you were thinking about how to tell this story and digging into it. Now we're flashing forward. You had heard about Hampton, you know, at a much earlier age, but as you're digging in to make this movie, how did you think about the sort of cinematic world that you would develop and explore with this movie?
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, picking up on the Scorsese influence, I think is very apt, you know, just because he has this ability to make tragedy and, you know, sort of heavier material incredibly entertaining and accessible and quite frankly, fun. We weren't able to make this movie fun, but the goal was, knowing the heaviness of the film that we weren't at all trying to shy away from, and knowing that, you know, the challenge in getting these ideas, Fred Hampton's ideas, and a story like this into, you know, through the studio systems, that we had to really make sure that the genre elements landed. And that it did feel like one film. It didn't feel like, you know, genre time and now serious movie time. You know, it had to feel so, you know, in terms of, you know, cinematic influences on the movie, it was really, my favorite movies are 70s crime dramas. Those are the movies that I watch late at night to wind down, you know? And so there was definitely a desire on my part early to have this movie feel inspired by that, not necessarily of that same ilk, because, you know, once Sean and I started talking about what this movie could be, we both agreed that it was important that there was sort of contemporary style to it, but we still wanted to retain sort of the stark reality of those 70s crime dramas, and not get too slick and not be over stylized. And, you know, there's a lot of style in the film, but you'll notice that the back half of the movie, the style disappears and it gets quieter and it gets slower. And it's just a sort of a general kind of like pall is supposed to gradually fall over the movie. And it's almost like that moment on on a roller coaster where, like, you know, you've been flying around and you get to that part where and it just slows down as you're going up and this dread kind of creeps. And it's going to happen, especially if you're someone who knows how this movie ends. You're really sitting there feeling, it's a horrifying feeling, you know, if you know what's coming. And then that assassination scene comes and it's just bang, 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 brutality, violence. And it's cruel. And then you go to Deborah's face and you have to really sit and reckon with what you've just witnessed, you know? And so it was, you know, constructing that wave and what are going to be the influences that allow us to vacillate between all of these different tones and yet it feel uniform. You know, I thought of Fred Hampton, I read his words and I saw him speak. I just was like, this guy's like one of the first MCs, you know? And so in a lot of ways, I was like, I want to shoot his speeches like concerts. And so what are the best concert docs? And I was watching a bunch of them and then I saw one with Kings. There was one close-up they utilized throughout the movie, but it's really powerful when it's on Miriam Makeba. And I was like, oh yeah, this is going to be something that we're going to employ here. And we use it twice. It really plays in a real powerful way at the High Off the People speech in the middle of the film. We pulled from that. We obviously pulled Malcolm X was a tremendous influence, you know. And I mean, No Country for Old Men in terms of the assassination scene and how the Coen brothers do such a great job of building suspense in that film. You know, we wanted to definitely like take a page out of that book.
It's interesting. So you just talked about the heaviness and getting to the second half of the movie. May I ask you to talk a little bit more about the first half then in setting up? We'll get to Eyes on the Prize in a moment because I think that's an important sort of gateway into this. But let's talk about once we're beyond that opening moment, and then we're in. So you're establishing the visual world. And you're using color, you're using camera movement. While the movie certainly isn't, you know, as you said, it's not fun per se, but you're kind of establishing the connection between all these guys and the world, and you know the spaces they inhabit together. It feels like I don't know if playful is the right word, but that's the word that comes to mind in terms of just how you're like playing with and using kind of. Like some visual sensibilities to kind of bring the audience in right away, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, you want to set people up so that they sit forward in their chair and they're like, oh, this is a big movie from the beginning, you know? So one of the things we wanted to do as much as possible, you know, it's part of the reason why, I mean, I hate exposition. So that's the number one reason why there's very little in it. But it's also because we wanted you to know as much as the people in the room at the same time. We never wanted you ahead of them. So when really Will and I discovered that Bill O'Neill used an FBI badge to steal a car, we were like, it'd be really cool if the audience, who's gonna have seen the trailer by this point, they're going to know that he's an FBI informant. Most people don't really know even what that means. It'd be kind of cool if the audience thinks when he flashes this FBI badge in this bar that he's an actual FBI agent. You know, so let's dress him like a G-man, you know, let's have him and then you start thinking, okay, well, you know, black kid in 1968 Chicago has never met an FBI agent. So what's his reference for how an FBI agent behaves and talks? Movies, TV, right? Dragnet. So he's going to adopt those speech patterns. You know what I mean? He's going to, and it's fun. Like the way you're laughing, like we were like, I was like, this is going to be fun. Like I'm gonna have a lot of fun with this scene, you know?
Yeah.
And so it was like, also let's hide his face, you know? Let's like really start this movie like classic noir, you know? And so we kind of like, Sean and I, we talked about it and we kind of built that opening. And then, you know, we go through the whole piece and I'm like, okay, so we have this guy steal a car. You know, it's going to make people really sit forward if a knife comes through the roof, you know? And so you're just thinking of ways to engage so that the whole point of, you know, using this genre element as a vessel was, as Fred Hampton Jr. says, you want to put the medicine in the applesauce, you know? And we just gave you up top a lot of applesauce so that, you know, you were relaxed, you know, you're on the edge of the seat, but you're relaxed like, okay, I thought I was going to see a heavy movie that was going to be a history lesson, but actually like, this is fun. And then you start to, we can indoctrinate you with these politics. And, you know, we have such an amazing performer and performance in Daniel that that ends up being fun too.
Eyes on the Prize was something that I remember. I'm a lot older than you, I guess. I remember seeing it in college.
No, I watched it too. I watched it in grade school.
You did? Okay, good. So it was one of those seminal, not just documentaries, but what it was about and what it invited me to learn more about at an age when I was like, you know, wanting to, you know, coming from a small town in California and moving to the big city, like wanting to like challenge myself and learn and connect. So tell me, just maybe help us understand. I don't know if everybody in our audience will necessarily know Eyes on the Prize, but maybe it has such a kind of cornerstone moment at the very beginning, and it kind of lays the foundation for everything that's going to happen after, right?
Eyes on the Prize was directed by Henry Hampton and produced by Henry Hampton. It was directed by actually a number of directors. And it was a docuseries. The first Eyes on the Prize focused on the Civil Rights Movement. Second Eyes on the Prize focused on the Black Power movement. And our film starts with an interview, a recreation of an interview that Eyes on the Prize 2 did with William O'Neill. And it's the only interview, period, televised or print interview that William O'Neill ever did. And he was actually in witness protection for a while. And I think the story I've heard is that someone found out that he had left and he was back in Chicago. But they didn't know if he was actually in Chicago, LA, or New York or something like that. And he made a deal with them that if they guessed right, maybe, I think it was like if they guessed right where he is, he'd sit down and meet with them. And he sat down. I heard that the story I hear is that he didn't take his sunglasses off for like the first 30 minutes. He was clearly unnerved. And he, you know, they conducted this interview. And in the course of the interview, it's really fascinating because he refers to the FBI and the Black Panthers as we and us interchangeably, right? So that's like really just like shows that all these years later, he's still confused as to where not necessarily his allegiance lies, because he made that decision very, very definitively early on. But you can even sort of tell from his last answer that he hasn't made peace with what he's done. He can't fully own what he's done. Like, even though throughout the course of the interview, it's clear that he considers himself and almost a sentinel of the FBI. But he's also like, this was a terrible thing. He says he was manipulated. He didn't know that Fred Hampton was going to be assassinated. He claims he didn't drug him. He expresses guilt 2 times during the interview. He almost breaks down and cries. He's like, I can't, because the interviewer wisely keeps wanting to press him about the assassination and going into the apartment the next day and seeing the carnage everywhere. And he's just like, I can't do it. So he's bothered. It gets to him. And then he's asked the final question of the interview, which is it's a testament to, you know, the interview is just like brilliance. he asked him what he would tell his son, who he had a 1-year-old son at the time. What would he tell his son about what he did? And you see William O'Neill take a moment and not only lie to you, but above all, he's lying to himself in that moment. He's trying to convince himself that his deeds were just, but he can't, so he's not making any sense. I mean, literally what he says makes absolutely no sense, especially in the context of everything he said up until that moment. And you basically watch this guy unsuccessfully lie to himself, and then you find out that he killed himself the night that series was broadcast on PBS. And so to me, even though there wasn't a lot of information out there about William O'Neill, it was kind of detective work that, Will and I were doing when we were going through that transcript, trying to get clues as to who this person was and how they felt about what they'd done.
Well, it's a brilliant setup thank you for the detail on the different elements and components of the film. And again, congratulations. Couple more questions.
Sure.
Tonight's event is, as I mentioned, it's around the country at arthouse theaters all around the country. Arthouse theaters are not a place we've had the opportunity to be physically in for almost a year now. It's hard. So I was thinking about the pandemic, and as the pandemic is happening, is almost a year ago, is becoming a reality for all of us. How did the pandemic impact your making of the film, your finishing of the film? We'll talk about the distribution of it later, but how did it impact just getting the movie finished?
The post-process was severely impacted in ways that we ultimately were able to overcome, but in some ways that I think improved the movie, specifically the music, because, initially our plan, Craig Harris, Mark Isham, our two co-composers, the plan was for them and our music editor, Marvin Morris, to gather a bunch of jazz musicians in the studio, and similar to what Miles Davis did with Elevated to the Gallows, improvise a score and then notate that score off of these improvisations. And then the pandemic hit, so you couldn't get musicians in a room. And Craig lives in New York, Mark lives in LA. They'd never met until their first meeting in New York that I set up. And so they basically were sending me MIDI jazz cues, which is terrible. You can't make jazz that way. You can't make jazz on a keyboard, certainly not the jazz that we envisioned for this film. And so I was just like, okay, I reached out to Zach Cowie, music supervisor, who I met through Jesse Plemons. And, he and I had spoken when I was in Cleveland, because Jesse had a mixtape that Zach had made with music on it from the era to kind of help Jesse get into the character. And Jesse was like, respectfully, I feel like you might want to hear this. And initially I was just like, I have a very clear sense of the music. That song you hear in the beginning, The Inflated Tear by Rahsaan Alan Kirk, I brought that into each studio pitch and played that for him, because I was like, I know what this is supposed to sound like, but now I'm trying to edit remotely. I've got family stuff going on, and I'm so disorganized, and as much knowledge as I have, I don't have a fourth of the knowledge that Zach has. And so, pandemic hits and I need cues, I need just temp stuff. And I hit up Zach, and he just starts sending me, just for every scene, I sent him the scenes I needed music for, and he just starts sending me maybe 6 cues per scene. And they're just really good. They're really, really working. And so I go back to Mark and Craig and I go, I know you guys thought you were going to be composing a lot more music than this, but I think we're going to have to start going, you can't compete with Duke Ellington, you know what I mean? and Eddie Gale, And so they took that as a challenge, which was great. It motivated them to try to kind of beat these jazz greats, Simultaneously, I have another friend named Quelle Chris, who is a hip hop producer, and he's composed music on a couple of shorts I've done. And he's just honestly, just an artistic hero of mine. And I knew I wanted him to contribute music to the film, but I also knew that I was already, I already had two composers, one of whom, and Craig, had never done film composition. There was no way that I was going to be able to attach Quelle as well. And so I just had him kind of sitting with me in sessions, because I knew I wanted to get his music in there, and I didn't know how, but I just had him. He'd sit in the editing bay with Kristen Sprague, my editor, and myself. And he finally one day watched the cut and he said, I really think I love the silence in this film, but there's one scene that I think you could use something for, and I'm gonna mock something up. And he came back with this percussive track that sounded absolutely nothing like anything else in the movie. And he plugged it in right during the shootout with the Panthers and the cops at headquarters. And it worked amazing, but it didn't sound like anything at all that we had. Mark Isham hated it. He was like, this makes no sense. You've taken all these cues from us already. And like now you're bringing this other guy and it's not cinematic. It sounds like we don't have a uniform sound. And he was annoyed, but one weekend he was like, all right, fuck it. Give me the stems to that song. Let me see if I can add some things to it to make it work like a piece of action music. And he did, and it was amazing. And I was like, oh my God, I never would have imagined that we'd have this kind of music in this movie, but now we do. Let's think about other scenes where there's Panther police violence. And so I found some others, and I said, okay, like when Jimmy Palmer gets shot, or when the Panthers go and meet the Crowns, even though that's not, a violent scene, but we wanted something with a little bit more energy and just a little more edge. And so I had Quelle and his partner, Chris Keys, contribute percussive tracks to these moments. And then Mark would come and add stuff on top of them. And we started to find a uniform sound with that stuff. Craig, it was amazing because Craig, he'd never done film composition. And when he started out, he was making all these songs and he just wasn't getting any placements because he was contributing the stuff Mark and him were doing, but they were initially really working separately a lot. But by the end, he was making score stuff and all that stuff was getting included in the movie. So it was a real like lemons to lemonade kind of thing where we ended up with this score that I think is really unique. It doesn't sound like anything else. It feels of the era, but it's also contemporary. It's got the action movie elements, all these things, this bouillabaisse that would not exist were it not for the pandemic,
That's a great story. Thank you. It's a fascinating organic process and a distanced organic process that you just, in retrospect, you can't imagine it happening like in a room over, a few days or whatever. Like it's fascinating.
And the thing that's kind of crazy, I'm only realizing this now as I'm saying it to you, is that that's how jazz music's made. Like we actually did make a jazz, like they actually did that.
Backed into it in a way you couldn't have predicted. You couldn't have predicted, so much of it, but you couldn't have predicted how you'd get to where you got in that relation, in relation to the music. That's wild. Yeah. That's wild. Look, I have to say, we're in this pandemic. People are still distanced, and the movie will be in theaters on February 12th and also on HBO Max. On the one hand, as someone and all of us that are with art houses watching this right now, on the one hand, we want to be in a theater watching this with family and friends with a big audience. On the other hand, part of me is just like kind of amped about the idea that the movie can be in theaters on the 12th and also dropped into living rooms all over the place on HBO Max at exactly the same moment. So that we can all have this experience together in a way that we never could have or could have imagined. I don't know, how do you process that, the balance between sort of responding to how to get this movie out now and doing it in a whole different way,
I think for our movie, it's actually perfect because, if you look at what the Black Panthers were trying to do, they were trying to provide people with access to information and other things, but information being one of them that they felt they should have access to that they weren't getting access to. And that's really what this movie is, and the opportunity to get it to far more people than would have seen it otherwise. The fact that we have an audience that can't go to restaurants, can't go to museums, some people won't even go to parks, So you have people who want they're thirsty for content. They're thirsty for movies, especially in a year like this one where so many movies just didn't come out. We had way less movies come out than normal, you know? Yeah. And a lot of the movies that did come out were like movies from 2015 that they never released, and they probably should have never released in the first place, you know? So it's like people are starving to watch stuff, and people who might not have had any interest in checking a movie like this out in the past, you know, based on the trailer we've cut and the fact that they have nothing else to do, might take a shot at watching a movie like this and get something out of it. So I think it's kind of perfect for our film. Well,
look, Shaka King, there's so much more we could talk about. I think we've been talking for about a half hour now, and I'll take a rain check and we'll talk in a movie theater at some point down the line in New York City, I hope, and we can watch the film with an audience there on a big screen, because that would be fun. That would be fun too. But again, thanks to everyone who tuned in all around the country for this sneak preview. Thank you to Shaka King and all of his collaborators for making this movie. And thank you for Shaka. Thank you for spending time to just talk with us today. It's really, really meaningful.
Thank you, Eugene.